This is the Epic Mercury Show. I am your host, Epic Mercury. I want to apologize for not publishing any podcast recently. I had a few medical issues pop up. I do want to get into the rhythm of publishing a podcast once every Wednesday about 3 o'clock or at 3 o'clock. I may move that back a little bit, like 3:15 or 3:30, but somewhere right around there. And one of the reasons I've struggled, even though I have a new device, I have a MacBook Pro, which is capable of handling the video that I want to deal with. One of the issues that I have is sound is very important to me. That's always been I think all of us kind of have our own special sensory input, whether it's visual, whether it's audio, whether it is kinesthetic. People who tend to be visual tend to speak very fast. People who tend to be auditory tend to speak in kind of a rhythm. People who are kinesthetic tend to talk in these very slow paces and tend to have trouble kind of articulating what they want or what their view. So I'm really obsessed with sound. So that's the first thing I can handle. And I realize that YouTube is the kind of modern platform. It's the modern public speaking platform. That's pretty much what it's become. Not just necessarily a content creator, but a public speaking platform. However, I can tolerate a lot when it comes to absorbing information that I want online. But one of the things I can't tolerate is shitty sound. I just can't stand terrible sound. If I come across a video that I really want to watch, has a piece of information, whether it's about AI technology or news or something involving psychic or remote viewing stuff, history, I will watch it as long as I can hear it properly. If the soundtrack is messed up, I don't care how good the data is, I am not going to sit there and watch it. I'm just not going to do it. So for me, the audio part is the most important. So even though I have a new powerful piece of equipment, MacBook Pro, that can handle all the video, and I certainly have gotten a little bit of experience with DaVinci Resolve as far as the video production, this particular podcast is going to be just a regular audio podcast with a static picture on it. This will probably be the last time I'll do this, but the audio is just so much more important to me than worrying about the other part. So this particular one, we're going to be taking a look at George Washington's most significant secret. So hopefully you will be able to follow my explanation here of my experience as a remote viewer and a natural psychic and how this comes through. It was about 20 years ago now when I placed a curious written cue in my blind target pool. The written cue was George Washington / most significant secret. Now, when I placed this in my pool, I was convinced that it would yield up something like a special weapon or an incredibly creative battle plan that Washington never deployed during the Revolutionary War. And like most targets I've thrown in my blind target pool over the years, I was completely wrong. Before I get into what the information I received or the experiences I had, I'm going to quickly go over some historical observations about a particular incident about our first president. A story primarily popularized by Mason Locke Weems, often referred to as Parson Weems, in his highly embellished biography, The Life of George Washington with Curious Anecdotes, published in 1804, goes something like this. Isaac Potts, a Quaker who owned a mill near Valley Forge, was initially a pacifist and perhaps even a loyalist sympathizer, wary of the revolutionary cause. One day, while walking through the woods, he supposedly came upon George Washington. To Potts's astonishment, he saw the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army kneeling in the snow in the woods, his horse tied nearby, engaged in fervent prayer. Washington was described as being deeply distressed by the dire condition of his troops, the brutal winter, lack of supplies, and widespread illness and desertion. His prayer was said to be a passionate plea to God for the divine intervention and guidance for the American cause. Witnessing this profound moment of piety and humility from a formidable general, Potts was deeply moved. He returned home and reported to his wife that he had always believed that the sword and the gospel were incompatible. However, seeing Washington pray convinced him otherwise. He declared that George Washington has this day convinced me of my mistake, and that he now believed Washington will yet prevail because he trusted God. The experience supposedly converted Potts to the American cause. Now, I'm going to go over some of the historical references, what historians have said about these things. So, the historical reliability and context. Weems' embellishments. Mason Locke Weems was known for his highly moralistic and often fabricated anecdotes to portray Washington as a paragon of virtue. Example, the cherry tree story. The prayer at Valley Forge fits this pattern. Late appearance. The story didn't appear in print until 1804, long after the events of the Revolution and Washington's death. If such a profound event occurred, it's highly unlikely it would have remained unrecorded by Washington or his contemporaries in his own extensive writings. Potts' background. While Isaac Potts did live near Valley Forge and owned a mill, historical research indicates he was not necessarily the loyalist sympathizer portrayed in the story, and there's no contemporary evidence of him witnessing such a prayer or having such a transformative experience. The historian's conclusions. While George Washington was a religious man who often spoke of providence and encouraged religious observation among his troops, it is certainly plausible that he engaged in private prayer. The specific account of Isaac Potts witnessing him kneeling in the snow at Valley Forge is widely considered a legend or myth. It's a powerful and enduring story that speaks to America's ideals of leadership and faith, but lacks concrete or materialistic historical verification. A later and more popular account of an event at Valley Forge goes like this. This story supposedly originated with a Revolutionary War veteran named Anthony Sherman, who claimed to have heard it from an officer close to Washington. This officer described Washington in his quarters at Valley Forge during the harsh winter of 1777-78. He is said to have been feeling the weight of the war and the suffering of his troops. While alone in his tent, Washington supposedly encountered a singularly beautiful female, or dark, shadowy being like an angel. This visitor then presented him with three distinct perils that the United States would face in the future. 1. The American Civil War. The angel showed him the ongoing struggle for independence, with the forces of Europe and America clashing. Number 2. The American Civil War. The most fearful peril, this vision depicted Americans fighting against each other, a bloody internal conflict. Eventually, a bright angel with Union on her brow, bearing the American flag, intervened and urged the divided nation to remember that they were brethren, leading to reconciliation. 3. A future invasion. This vision showed thick black clouds arising from Europe, Asia, and Africa, forming a massive force that invaded America, devastating the land. However, a light from heaven, accompanied by legions of bright spirits, and the Union angel descended and joined the American inhabitants, helping them repel the invasion and secure victory. At the conclusion of the vision, the angel delivered a message, quote unquote, let every child of the Republic learn to live for his God, his land, and Union. Historical context and accuracy, again, from a traditional historian's point of view. Origin. The earliest known publication of Washington's vision appeared in the Philadelphia Inquiry in June 1861, just a few months after the start of the Civil War. It was written by Charles Wesley Alexander using the pseudonym Wesley Bradshaw. Purpose. Historians widely agree that Alexander's story, along with other similar allegorical tales he wrote, was intended as patriotic propaganda to boost morale and promote the Union cause during the Civil War. Lack of contemporary evidence. There is no mention of such a vision in Washington's personal papers, letters, or in the contemporary accounts or memoirs of his officers and associates. Discrepancies. The alleged source, Anthony Sherman, was indeed in the Continental Army, but historical records indicate he was not at Valley Forge during the winter of 1777-78. He had died well before he supposedly recounted the vision in 1859. In essence, while the vision at Valley Forge is a compelling and often repeated story, it is a legend, according to historians, rather than a factual account of George Washington's life. It reflects later American anxieties and hopes, particularly during the turbulent period of the Civil War. Now what my blind remote viewing session revealed. Keep in mind that all I have to go on at the start of a session is 8 random target reference numbers written on the outside of an envelope containing either a picture or a written cue. I have no idea whether the target is a person, place, thing, or event anywhere in time and space, past, present, or future. Let's also keep in mind that this particular target was in a 100 count blind pool, and those targets included everything from my own death, my friends' optimal trajectories, pictures of supposed UFOs, other historical and biblical events, as well as completely boring targets like a picture of an ice cube, a tiger, and various flowers. A large variety helps a viewer hone and keep their skills sharp. I won't go into the technicalities or stages of a remote viewing session, but when a viewer's skills are sharp and conditioned, one can usually tell by the time one reaches stage 3 what kind of target it is, vaguely speaking, like a trajectory, a person, an event, an object, or a place. When I hit stage 3, I could tell this was a mind probe of some kind. I didn't know who, nor is that the purpose of the remote viewing session. The point is to keep one's psychic aperture open and continue gathering data about the target without drawing conclusions. The first impressions I received were of a man on his knees in prayer in the woods. Snow was on the ground. I could tell this was from the past because of how dirty and old everything felt. I could sense, hear, and smell a horse nearby. This man was under tremendous distress and dressed in some kind of old military uniform. Let's keep in mind that I forgot about this target, which is a good thing. I created a large pool and had to wait at least a month before I started working on it. I forgot the targets, honestly, which again is a good thing from an RV accuracy perspective. Now, those of you not familiar with the remote viewing process, which is probably most of you, might not realize how quickly we try to move through the RV process and just gather data without judging or stopping to analyze. We just perceive and record in structured stages. There was a force nearby acting on this man. That's when I sensed a strong metaphysical presence with an unmistakable male energy to it. The entire scene seemed frozen to me, like the man was being held in place by this energy or force emanating from a metaphysical being, which after a minute or so, I labeled as an angel in my session. I saw flashes and felt events from the Revolutionary War. This was the first sense of Washington himself I received. I sensed him being reassured that as long as he was careful and strategic, the Revolutionary Army would be victorious over the British. Then I sensed and saw events from the Civil War and finally from modern America. This vision spanned hundreds of years. Through all of this, I could feel the intense love and concern that this man had for his country. It was quite touching. The events that were from modern America included not only a land invasion of the United States, but also the United States splitting into at least 3 separate areas or factions. These factions did not seem to be contiguous, so some areas of the U.S. that were allied were geographically separated by a rival area or faction. This seemed to pain the man the most, that the country he loved and was working so hard for, pouring his blood, sweat, and tears into, would eventually fracture into 3 separate nations. Nevertheless, there was a profound sense of reassurance from this angel that this was okay, and the man's sacrifices would be worth it if he were faithful. Even though his country would not last forever, it would leave an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of humanity and set a precedence for future countries. He was comforted knowing that his country would be a shining beacon on a hill despite its shortcomings and the time it might lose its way during its existence. Now, one specific point I want to make about remote viewing angels. When we humans turn our relatively dim and undeveloped psychic senses toward angels, they allow us to perceive them. If they don't want to be perceived, they can deflect our psychic attention away to something else. Demons cannot deflect this way, but angels can. Even though I was not aiming at viewing an angel, the answer to the question about George Washington's most significant secret was this angelic encounter. I would not have been able to perceive the angel's presence with Washington at Valley Forge unless it allowed me to. And yes, this applies even retroactively across time in the past. The only other point I want to make is about the largest part of this secret. Not only did Washington keep this to himself and a few close friends, but about a third of the angel's prophecy was never disclosed to anyone, not even his closest friends or wife. There are other events that will happen before and after the invasion of the United States that I could perceive and will keep to myself, even though I was able to perceive them. While I haven't remote viewed it yet, it wouldn't surprise me a bit if Isaac Potts saw this angelic encounter, and that's what really converted him to the revolutionary cause. I find it quite humorous that historians discount this vision of Washington's because it was not recorded or published anywhere, at least not until later. Is it really such a mystery? Let's take a look at how contemporary people are treated by others when they claim angelic encounters. No matter how sincere the experiencer is, they can't give someone the same experience while relaying the story. The listener might sympathize with the experiencer's sincere emotions and the impact the encounter had on them. But from a mundane, material perspective, these are stale words and they fall flat. They cannot capture the magnitude of the encounter. Now, when neural technology advances and we can retrieve memories from experiencers, this will be a step in the right direction, but we aren't there yet. Why would Washington want to open himself up to endless scrutiny and relentless ridicule by revealing this encounter? For that matter, why would Isaac Potts if he witnessed it? I can tell you that from hiding myself for about 2 years while I was learning and mastering remote viewing, keeping your perceptions to yourself can be so restful. No arguing, no fighting, no defending yourself. To this day, I'm tempted to keep my perceptions, no matter how verifiable and accurate, to myself just because it's exhausting dealing with the endless ridicule and questions about my motives. This is particularly insulting when I consider the experience or perception to be sacred. Yeshua's admonition not to cast your pearls before swine comes to mind. I want to testify, and yes, I'm using that word specifically, that George Washington did have this angelic encounter. We have fragmented and inaccurate versions written later, but it did happen. There was an angel sent from divinity to show and reassure Washington of the righteousness of his cause. And from this, we must also inductively conclude that divinity was directly involved in the foundation of the United States of America. Now, people can argue with me and ridicule me, and they will, but there is a way for you to be able to verify this. This requires learning remote viewing and practicing long enough to sharpen your skills before RVing Washington's most significant secret in the blind yourself. I guarantee you're going to perceive the same event, maybe through your own unique perceptual filters, but the same corroborating information will be there. There is objective truth in the universe. And while remote viewing might not be the easiest skill to learn, it is one way to perceive truth outside of the 5 mundane senses. Using our logic, our 5 senses, and reason is a necessary way to navigate this life, but it is not the only method of perception and knowledge. Remote viewing is what the ancient religious movements called gnosis, that intuitive, mystical insight and knowledge about divinity or other topics, events, and people. The main advantage we have over the Gnostics of the past is that we have methods and protocols to work as a team and be able to corroborate each other's information. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast and will consider learning the remote viewing skill for myself or another competent instructor. There is a whole universe out there just waiting to be discovered. In the words of the eminent astronomer Carl Sagan, somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known. And the irony of quoting Dr. Sagan is not lost on me. I hope he finds it amusing from the other side. I can assure you his personality and consciousness persisted despite his disbelief in the afterlife.